Movies, real indie movies and popcorn. Real indie movies, independent movies, real independent movies and popcorn. Hey, welcome to the Real Indie Podcast. My name is Brian Steinberg. I'm the host of this show. Now, we'll talk about a few things that are happening right now in the motion picture industry. The motion picture industry. I guess that's really interesting because things have really been changing relatively quickly, and this is something that I've kind of been feeling for a while now. Actually, probably ever since I got back from the Maryland Film Festival, I've just been feeling this kind of undercurrent. I've been spending most of my time learning how to make films, and a lot of us filmmakers are probably hanging out. Either we're in school right now, and peering our head out. Every now and then we're spending most of our time writing scripts, doing casting, but we're pretty soon going to have to get back and get into the industry. So right now I've been sort of looking at that a little bit closely. I've been kind of prairie dogging and from my scripts and from my productions, and as a student, and starting to look at, well, what's the environment out there. And when I went to the Maryland Film Festival, I was getting this weird vibe, because I come from the independent model where that you made a really cool film, you got it into a good film festival, in that you just were discovered. The fact that you were in that film festival made you sort of stand out, and then from standing out in that way, some company, whether it be Miramax or some other independent film company, would basically take your film and give you a big check and distribute your film, and you're on your way. You were, the next Kevin Smith or the next Spike Lee. You were doing kind of that low-budget movie that eventually got picked up, and then you had a career as an independent filmmaker. And it's still out there partly, I think, but the industry really is radically changed. And the people who I've talked to about it, who are making these films at these film festivals, are basically just seeing this thing as being really different from that model. The model that I'm talking about basically is the model that was sort of founded in the early 90s when Kevin Smith first came out with his movie Clerks, doing it for about, I think it was like $28,000. So he made Clerks. And then, from there, his next movie he got real money and real distribution for. He did Mallrats from there. So the question is, in this day and age where it's a little bit easier to make your film, you have digital technology, your film could cost you, $0 to make just on your iPhone, up to tens of thousands of dollars to make. And it's possible to even raise the money through crowdfunding. But even with all that though, right now, I guess one thing that really stands out and I really want to talk about is Steven Spielberg, which is kind of weird to bring up Steven Spielberg in a real indie podcast, because Steven Spielberg, I guess he kind of started out, as this person who just kind of was a real indie person doing his first film. But he is, for most of his career, he is really synonymous with blockbuster movies. So if Steven Spielberg in this day and age is complaining about the current state of the film industry in America, things really have changed. And what I'm talking about is actually a declaration that he made a couple weeks ago. He basically said, Steven Spielberg, this is from an article I read in the Hollywood Reporter. You can check it out on my blog. He says, Steven Spielberg predicts implosion of film industry. And what is he talking about here? Well, he said basically that the industry is, an implosion is inevitable, whereby half a dozen or so of $250 million movies flop at the box office and alter the industry forever. So that's what he's basically saying. He's also predicting that what we're going to see is sort of this price variation at the theaters too, where people are paying like $20 to go see, say, Iron Man. They're already doing that already if they go see Iron Man 3D. Like, for example, in my town, you can see Iron Man, it's $15 you want to see the 3D. And he also talked about, say, for people who want to see his movie, they may spend less money. For example, that they may spend $7 to see Lincoln, that the Iron Mans of the world are subsidizing these other movies, right? I guess I don't really agree with that. That part of his statement necessarily. I don't know if people are really going to be paying that much to see these movies in the theaters. Maybe they will. I don't know. But what he was basically talking about is something that's actually happening right now. And in the last couple of years, we've seen some really big blockbuster movies really tank at the box office. So it's already happening. Last year, for example, there was a movie called, I think there was even two movies. There was John Carter. Let me just look this up. I got my little box office mojo here. John Carter. And John Carter was a massive, just one. It was kind of, it spooked everybody. It cost $250 million to make. The thing only did $73 million domestic box office. It picked up in foreign box office. Actually, it did a really big chunk in China, like 40, like I think $43 million in China. But it really didn't go anywhere. If you look at the, I'm going to talk a little stats right here, and I'm kind of getting into film, movie stats. I've kind of become like the sports person who gets into sports stats, but I do it for movies. So if you look at the stats here, the big telltale sign that you find right here with John Carter is it was on, it's by the number of screens. I think you can tell that by whether a movie is really doing well or not. So it started out as with 3,749 screens the first weekend, right? It did pretty decent, I guess, but then the next week it kind of didn't do that well. They kept the same amount of screens. The next week they knocked down 500 screens, and then the next after that, usually your big run is that 4-week run, right? 4 to 6 weeks, where it stays in the theater for like on a lot of screens for that like 4 to 6 week run, and then it really dies down really quickly. But what's a telltale sign here? In the fourth week, it knocked down 1,400 screens. So basically, there's already this feeling that there was a lack of confidence in this film. And this is the first time, really, we were seeing these things happen. So, just knocking these movies out of the screens, I kind of almost feel that they kind of held over this movie a little bit longer, gave it over 3,000 screens in the third week, just because they were unfamiliar with this phenomenon that a big, huge sci-fi blockbuster budget movie is going to really tank this much. So by the fifth week here, we see that it's knocked down to 1,000 screens. Now, 1,000 screens is kind of where we're starting to talk about a popular independent movie range, okay? And then by the sixth week, it's already knocked down to 444 screens domestic in the U.S. Basically, it wasn't really given any faith at this point. People weren't liking it. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the movie. I actually put it in my Netflix queue, just almost as a curious phenomenon. It wasn't something that I was really excited to run out and go see, but I'm kind of now want to see the deal. But in box office, basically, let me just explain the numbers real quick. If a movie is made for $250 million, and partly this is described by Steven Soderbergh, he gave a really great talk on the state of cinema. Check it out. If you go to my blog, you can check it out. I provide a link for it. It's a really great speech, and he talks about some of these numbers because I'm not familiar with everything in the industry. But he says that basically, if you look at the budget of a movie, roughly 100%, they take that budget, and then the marketing of the movie is roughly 100% of that budget. Usually, maybe even more, in fact. So if you're talking about a $250 million movie, they may put in let's say another $250 million into marketing the thing. Maybe that's too much, maybe that's too little, I don't know. But bottom line, they're putting at least 50% to 100% more into marketing that movie. So this movie, John Carter, would have to, and let's just say for argument's sake they put 50% in there for marketing, would have to make $375 million just to make back what they spend. But that's not really the story, because the reality is you really only get in, as far as the people who produce the movie, about 50% of box office. Okay, so this movie, this John Carter movie, basically would have to do $750 million. Now, we're not talking about video on demand, we're not talking about DVD here, we're not talking about TV and all the other things. So there is money that comes in after this, but basically, if we're talking about strictly motion picture box office, this film would have had to do $750 million to actually just break even, just to pay their bills. Just to make back all the money they spent on the film and all the money they spent on, on advertising, print and TV ads, etc. So the movie did $282 million. So they're looking at losing anywhere from anywhere from 100 to maybe $200 million. Okay, $200 million. Now think about it. Think about all the independent movies you can make with that $200 million they spend. I mean, I'm looking at the budget for a movie that I want to create. I mean, we're talking about if I had $50,000, I would be so happy. You know, I mean, just think about all the Kickstarters you can actually fund for $250 million, and this is just one movie. And I don't. I mean, I don't know. Could these companies really afford to be, losing this much money? So that's what Steven Spielberg means. So let's bring it back to current day, because this is 2012, right? There's a new movie out right now. It's currently in the theaters. It's called After Earth. Okay, it is a movie with Will Smith and Will Smith's son. It was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. I think I'm saying that right. Hopefully I am. And it's kind of being thrown into this John Carter world. Big sci-fi production. Now, the interesting thing about this movie is it's kind of cheap. Relatively speaking, the movie was only $130 million budget. Not a huge budget. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm not sure why the budget wasn't more. I'm not sure. Maybe they toned down the effects as much. I mean, who knows? But right now we're looking at. Let me just look at the week here. 300,400 screens. But the big telltale sign, which we're seeing right now, is it just knocked down to. They just knocked down 969 screens. And this is the summer. It's the big box office season. It has a lot of competition now. The Man of Steel movie just came out, right? So this isn't really looking that good. It hasn't really scored these big high numbers that they were hoping to score. And I think what we're seeing right now, and I'm really curious to see what happens basically next week, this movie, especially considering the John Carter thing, because with John Carter, that movie received its big screen hit, knockdown hit. They kind of held on for 2 to 3 weeks, and then they just sort of gave up on it, right? I'm really curious to see that in this kind of new age of film, if they don't give any faith to it. Because the big thing is that, why would they give the screens to a movie that's not really making it when they can just give like those extra 1,000 screens to a movie that's doing really well, like say Superman or Iron Man or the next movie that's coming out, maybe a next big indie comedy, for example, like the new indie comedy with Seth Rogen called This Is the End, right? So getting back to indie though, or getting back to movies in general, I guess I can say, let me just go back to my site really quick. Steven Soderbergh, he talks about in his essay, The Current State of Cinema. He talked a little bit about the numbers, and I guess here is part of what he's probably talking about, right? Basically that the average film, say mid-level film, is $30 million. That's what pretty much you're going to pay for a studio production. And like Soderbergh was saying, is that you need another $30 million basically to market the thing. And that means that any movie that you do, so that any movie that you make basically has to be a $120 million movie. $120 million movie. Now, studios you can't even talk to them if you come up with an idea that's a little more alternative. If you're coming up with a comedy that's like more fringe, has a gay and lesbian theme, it maybe appeals to a certain demographic that isn't as mainstream, or let's put it this way, won't really appeal to the international audience. And that's the really big thing. The way that these films actually make it is through international audience. And Soderbergh basically said something that really stood out. He said that the current box office, as far as the numbers, has gone from 50% of worldwide box office, which was foreign, now to 70 to 75%. Basically, things have really switched, and we really have opened up this huge market amid the American film industry, these big American films, to foreign box office. And that's kind of, I'm kind of thinking it's kind of interesting, because in one way it's kind of cool, right? That America is producing a product that we're selling very well overseas. Okay, so they're buying our films. They really love these big budget films, and they're buying and watching our films. And at one level, that's really great. I mean, it's awesome, right? You know, America, go imports, right? At the other level, it means that we basically will be seeing, because of that ratio, and because if you look at the numbers, I mean, if you look at like most of these movies, I mean, John Carter specifically, I mean, they lost a lot of money on it, but man, if they only had domestic box office, it would have just been, it would have been devastating. You know, they only had $73 million domestic box office. They were able to bring in $209 more million overseas. That one is purely those numbers. I mean, that's 75% foreign box office, right? If you look at a movie like the current movie Iron Man 3, right? Take a look at some numbers here. Iron Man 3, you know, one probably, I think currently the most successful film, I think one of the most successful box office films of all time, right? It did huge box office in the United States. $200 million production, for around $400 million, just shy of $400 million domestic box office in the United States. In foreign, it did $800 million. So basically, it did around 60. You're talking about 67% foreign and 33%, domestic American box office. Now, if it just did, and this is very interesting, if we just take away foreign box office completely with Iron Man and we just look at domestic box office, the movie wouldn't even have made money. I mean, it would barely have made money. We're talking about, it would have just barely done $200 million. So without that foreign box office. And what's really important about that, if we're talking about like our independent film, there's two things. One is that if we can make a movie that could potentially appeal to a foreign audience, and we can actually distribute it and work with maybe developing a network, a more independent network too, with other audiences, you can do quite well as a filmmaker and not even have to worry about this sort of becoming limited domestic market for films because of these big action films. Something to think about. But at the other end, what we're seeing here is that unless your movie is, for the most part, a very watered down, very watered down movie that really only appeals to a huge cross cultural base, which whatever that means, Iron Man, Batman, etc. Those movies just won't be made because your movie, the next Steven Soderbergh movie or etc., next other kind of movie is not even going to be made because it's not going to be able to get that foreign box office. It's not going to get that 75% foreign box office. Usually films that are very hard to translate, okay, are comedies, because comedies tend to be very culturally specific, right? And I think comedies and dramas, which is a lot of the stuff that you probably are thinking about doing for indie, certainly an independent filmmaker is not going to be able to make the next Iron Man, which I kind of am saying this with a touch of, grain of salt here, because, I mean, the way the technology is going right now, it's probably entirely possible if someone's like really, really good at using like Maya and say, you throw some green screen in there and who knows, maybe After Effects, Maya, you might be able to produce a film in caliber with the next Hunger Games or the next whatever. If you know someone who's like decent with costuming, I guess that's my prediction. My prediction is you're going to see a low budget, big budget looking action movie come out of one of these indie people. All these independent people are going to produce the next kind of big superhero thing, and it's going to be for a low budget, and it's going to be like the movie The Purge. And I'll talk about that then in a minute. So what we're seeing here is this is kind of this thing that Steven Spielberg was saying, is that if let's just say if Iron Man didn't make it, and let's say if Superman didn't make it, and let's say the handful of other big blockbuster movies didn't make it, if, for example, because we are so beholden to our foreign audience now, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think it's great that we are producing things that people in other countries want to see. So it is kind of a good thing, but at the same time, we're very vulnerable to it. And I think that's what Steven Spielberg was talking about, that we're creating films basically that are kind of hit or miss. And we're spending so much money, we're investing so much of our industry just on a handful of films that, quite frankly, if this model of superhero films somehow falters, and he's predicting it will, basically, that our industry is really kind of in danger. That we literally, that I mean, what would happen if you came up with two, big budget action movies by one studio? You're looking at, let's say, you got $500 million budgeted in that, plus like another $500 million budgeted into marketing, and they both tank. I mean, your studio's going under. And the question is, what are they going to make next to try to build themselves up again? You know, uh, After alienating most of the other, the real filmmakers who wanted to make films that haven't been making films. I mean, I'm looking at my Netflix queue right now, and I mean, I like superhero films. So don't get me wrong, I like some of them. Some of them are okay. I'll just say that. I mean, I'm a fan of some of these things. I read comic books growing up. I'm not like a mega nerd into this scene, but I'm into them. I'm not saying like I'm not this you know not this purist who says no, it must be a English period costume piece or nothing. I mean, I like these films. So, but the thing is, though, my question is like we're kind of in pursuing this kind of certain route with our film industry. We are pushing out other films too, and not just like medium level films that like Soderbergh was talking about wanting to make. We're pushing out like even like studio indie films. I mean, will we have the next Artist? Will we have the next Descendants movie? Will there be, the movie Mud is kind of, with Matthew McConaughey's in the theaters right now. It made it in the big theaters, but I see it really, really being sold in mostly these indie houses, like the Michigan Theater or the State Theater here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So that's really the question. So the thing that I see that's kind of interesting right now is that kind of development where we're seeing it. We're absolutely seeing it right now. And I don't know, I guess I mean, I don't know how. Do I feel really bad for these studios who make these films and they don't really work out? I mean, I guess partly they're not really diversifying. I guess that's the thing, And I think what Steven Spielberg's talking about. If we have one season, literally, where the foreign audience basically decides that we're not interested, we don't want to watch superhero movies this year. And that's all we're getting. Like they just say we don't want to watch X-Men, we don't want to watch Wolverine, we don't really, we're not really excited. We're not going to put the dollars out there where you had a very flat market there and you basically weren't really selling that high. If suddenly that foreign market that's supposed to be 75% of your draw worldwide box office suddenly turns into not 50 but like 20 or 30%, suddenly we're kind of in trouble. The whole industry is basically in trouble. It's like we kind of bet the farm on like, big movies. So I'm kind of curious about this. What's going on this week? Another thing that happened this week, let's just go over to the blog really quick. Something else in the news here is a current lawsuit. There is apparently on the movie Black Swan, I think there was another movie too, a production company that was done in New York. Let me see if I can check this article here. Basically, if you're an independent filmmaker, if you're going to school for independent film, one of the ways you kind of get in the industry is you get an internship, right? So right here, it's an article. It was by, let's look it up. It's called The Atlantic, which is the Atlantic magazine, and it was their site, The Atlantic Wire. I guess it's their online version of their site. They had talked about a lawsuit for people working on the movie Black Swan. Two people basically were working as interns, unpaid interns, and they won a lawsuit actually to sue to get wages. Now, what's really interesting about that is that there's plenty of people out there working in unpaid internships, but these people basically felt that if you're talking about an unpaid internship, and I guess it's such a bigger topic to talk about internships. I feel like if you're doing a job, you should be paid. You really should be, and this is kind of a weird subject too for indie, and I'll just give full disclosure here. I'm an independent filmmaker, and when I make my first independent feature-length film, I'm gonna really need to have people who want I can't pay. I probably couldn't afford to pay people. I probably would be zero to no budget. I'm not sure how the numbers all work on everyone's film, but basically it's the kind of thing we're all kind of working together. We're all sharing in this art, and we're all trying to make this movie the best we can possibly make, and we're all trying to basically. And if there's any money there, I mean, if there's any money, I mean any money, you know, from the film, partly I feel like the model is where the filmmaker then, shares. It's sort of like a profit sharing thing. But if there's no money for anybody, then everyone's just doing it for art. Everyone's getting together to do this thing for art. Now, as far as but when you're talking about a big production movie, a movie that's going to make money, that actually I believe won the Academy Award, by a big production house, the movie Black Swan, these people basically were just these gophers. As far as internships, they aren't really learning. They're not like assistant directors or assistant to the DP, director of photography. They're not really getting this huge amount of learning. They're not working directly with the marketing department or really, helping to, be involved in launching, say, promotional campaign for the movie or involved in the graphic design of the movie. If they're really just hanging out there on set, grabbing, getting coffee and not really learning anything, and they're not getting paid, I think that's really the factor we talked about. We talked about in this lawsuit, that they were talking about in this lawsuit, about that if it really is an internship, it really is a process in which you are working hands on with people in the industry, almost basically like a class, right? you know I mean, I guess it's like if you had this internship and you literally just like sat in the back of the room and the person made you sweep up the studio or something, like a green screen room, like, here, sweep up the green screen room, and you didn't learn anything. You're like, man, this is not an internship. I should be paid if I'm actually going to be doing this work. And I think that's the case in which that happened, and it kind of makes precedent because this doesn't really happen all the time. Basically, this is a kind of way of life right now, is these unpaid internships. And on my blog, I refer to, okay, sorry, I'm getting confused here. The opening scenes, the central characters, like parents, are getting on the girl who's a recent college grad, the fact that she's working an unpaid internship and that she's been there for a while, like over a year, and it's time that she asks her employer for a job. Well, she does ask her employer for a job. I guess I'm giving away the first minute or two of the film, and it's kind of both comic and tragic the way that her boss interacts, and she ends up getting fired from her unpaid internship. And it just seems like the reality now that basically, I don't know how long these internships go on for, but basically it's kind of like a fifth year of college for the parents that can afford to, help a child move to usually a big city like New York City. I mean, the girls, the lead character in Girls, for example, is living in New York City and working in publishing, or at least she was interning in publishing. So usually that's kind of the deal where your parents have to help you out. I mean, you're not getting paid. How do you live in New York City, Washington D.C., L.A., and other places in the country, working 40 hours or more and not get paid? And supposedly the idea is you're going to get a real job from this down the road. I don't know. I don't know if you will get a real job. I don't know if it's just spending another year, or if the job that you normally would have been paid to get as an entry-level employee is just permanently forever going to be replaced by an intern, an unpaid intern, where there's just kind of this endless loop of unpaid interns who are just working, working in the companies or saving money. I don't know. But here is an example in the film industry where someone wasn't getting paid to do a job which basically they weren't even learning that much on the job anyway. So it's kind of a fascinating story. Another little story on the blog right now. Filmman's internship wins lawsuit. So what else is going on right now with Indy? Well, just a little bit with me. I guess I'm just doing a quick little rant here. I guess with blog right now, what I'm doing actually is I'm starting to come up with a listing of all of the independent movie houses in America. So I don't know. I think I have like 75, 80 listed right now. I'm going to try to go state by state. A lot of this information is kind of like regional, local information, so I don't know them all. So hey, if you have, please come to my site, take a look at all the indie movie houses. If you see one of the movies, you know, see like your favorite indie movie house that is not listed here. By indie movie house, it's like, they're playing these smaller movies. I don't know. I don't know what you qualify, but basically, like, if they're playing like Iron Man and the Man of Steel and Spider Man, and that's all they're playing, it's probably not an indie movie house. Okay, if they're playing movies, for example, let me just list. I also have a listing of movies that are in theaters. If they're playing movies, for example, like new movies that are out now called Francis Ha, Kings of Summer, Before Midnight, Mud. Some of these are sort of, I mean, they're indie, but they're kind of a little bigger too. They're certainly more indie than I am. I'm trying to figure out what category I fit into. There's kind of like an indie studio class, and then there's kind of Kickstarter class. Okay, which is kind of where the movie like Zero Charisma that I just saw at the festival is, and I don't know, maybe some of the earlier movies of Mumblecore. I'll talk a little bit about Mumblecore later, but anyway, I'm looking at my site here. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I got some like 30 movies right here that are posted that are currently in theaters. I can't say exactly where they're playing. If they're gonna play in your area, check the indie movie houses, and also I have a listing here of events for specifically film festivals. So if you're interested in checking out a local film festival in your area or even traveling for some, I have a list of some, maybe 20, 30 film festivals. I myself am going to be going to the Traverse City Film Festival this year. It's going to be in Traverse City, Michigan. Am I saying that? Traverse? I think Traverse City. I think I always say that wrong. But that's going to be on July 30th through August 5th up in Traverse City, Michigan. Really great festival, really great place to see a festival. They have some 6 different venues, really big, and they also have a really great Majestic Theater, the State Theater up there. It's right on the coast. It's just really great. If you have a chance to get up there, it's like the agricultural little corner of Michigan where they grow a lot of. You'll go through like cherry orchards, and wine has become really popular too as a crop for northern Michigan. So they actually have a lot of regional wines that we make up here, and we also have lots of really fun things like tasting rooms. And it's kind of like, I kind of describe it as the Napa Valley, although it's not as big as Napa Valley, but I really describe it as the Napa Valley of the Midwest. So it's a really great place to be. It's a great place to see a festival. I really recommend that you check it out. A lot of other really great festivals coming up. Whatever. It's just really great to check them out in your area. So I'm trying to include these things on my site right now. A bunch of just filling up a little news right now, what's going on in the industry. But really encourage you, go out there, see some movies. Go to your local independent movie theaters. See what's playing right now. Go to a film festival. Support indie. Actually, I think I'm going to do another thing too. I haven't really done it right now, but I'm probably going to do a Kickstarter page on my blog. So I'll just promote some of these movies that are kind of out there right now and that need funding. So hey, come to my blog. Thanks. My name is Brian. I'm trying to get some hosts here. I'm going to be trying to talk to people about trying to get a host or someone who does documentary film to talk a little bit more about documentary film as independent. And I'm also working on talking to maybe some of my classmates here and talking about where they see their career going within film. And also the 48-Hour Film Festival, which I'm going to be doing too. And just a little buzz about that. 48-Hour Film Festival is a contest basically where filmmakers all across the country get together. I guess it's done regionally, for example. Like I'm in Michigan here, so I'll be doing the Detroit version of that. So basically people in the Detroit area, filmmakers get together, they're given a theme, and they have to make an entire film within 48 hours. That's including, written, shot, edited, and handed to the people at the theater within 48 hours. Kind of a crazy thing. But it's a lot of fun. A lot of my classmates have been doing it year after year. It is the first year I'm going to be doing that. So I'll be posting that movie up there once we're done. And I'll be posting more information about other 48s. If you're a filmmaker or someone interested in film, it's a really great opportunity to get yourself out there and be able to work on a film, whether it be an actor or someone who just, I don't know, helping people look around equipment. You can just see how some of these smaller productions are done, and it helps to get some experience that way. And people are always looking for help on a 48-hour film, man. Let me tell you. My name is Brian, and you were listening to the Real Indie Podcast. Look forward to check out my site, check out my Facebook page, and I will talk to you soon. Real indie movies and popcorn. Real indie movies, real independent movies, and popcorn. Hey, thank you.